Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. It's been a big week for important questions. Why did the Belfast Trust and wider health authorities not act more quickly on concerns about staff relations at the Royal Victoria Hospital's cardiac surgical unit, especially with warnings that similar problems are going on elsewhere in that trust and beyond? There were questions too around the sentencing of the leading loyalist Winky Irvine, caught with guns and bullets in his car. He wasn't prosecuted under terrorism legislation, but has reportedly joined fellow UVF prisoners in Maghaberry Prison. And from a Dublin jury, answers to the questions at the heart of a 5-week trial involving Gerry Adams and the BBC.
Taking this case was about putting manners on the British Broadcasting Corporation.
If the BBC's case cannot be won under existing Irish defamation law, it's hard to see how anyone's could.
And for reaction to all of that, along with her thoughts on the latest survey into party support here, the political editor of the Belfast Telegraph, Suzanne Breen. We regularly report on the latest parts of our health service facing the stresses and strains of having gone for years without reform, dealing with too many patients and not having enough money. But this week's leaked report of what went on in the cardiac surgical unit run by the Belfast Trust caused widespread shock. On Friday, the Health Minister Mike Nesbitt met with the chair of the Trust, Kieran Mulgrew, and this is what Mr Mulgrew had to say afterwards.
The reality is that we have a difficulty. We're not shying away from that difficulty. We're not trying to hide it, and we will address that. And I told that to the Minister, and we want to be judged on how we manifestly move forward to solve the problems rather than to be judged on where we are. I would say that of the 250 people who work within this unit, that I've spoken with 150 of them. I've spoken to them as clearly and as frankly as I'm speaking to you. We've also given them something against which they can hold us account. I did a walk around within the unit this morning. I spoke to as many staff as possible, and I can tell you that those staff want to make progress, that they are keen. We provide an excellent service. There are difficulties within relationships within a very small group, and we will address those difficulties.
Kieran Mulgrew from the Belfast Trust. Well, I'm joined now by the chair of the Stormont Health Committee, Philip McGuigan. Thanks for being with us today. We're tackling this and we're being transparent about it, is essentially the message from Kieran Mulgrew. Are you convinced?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're talking about a leak report, and there have been very many public trust issues as a result of that leak report. So I think in the interests of transparency, the first thing that needs to happen is the report needs to be published. Certainly as a member of the Health Committee, we need to see the report. We're told there are recommendations and an action plan contained within the report. So I think for proper scrutiny and to restore public trust, what we need to see is the report in the first instance published so we can interrogate the recommendations for restoring public trust in this issue.
Yeah, well, the Minister's already made it clear he wants to see the report published, but he has legal concerns that need to be addressed, first of all. But it's not just about those legal concerns being addressed. It's about members of the public actually seeing entirely for themselves what was going on. Mr Mulgrew there says the Trust was being transparent with staff in terms of giving them the report. What about members of the public?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the health service is about protecting people, treating people when they're ill. People need to have confidence that when they go to a hospital or whatever health setting they're going to, that they are being looked after properly. In this instance, the report has shown very serious concerns. The public have been concerned. I think one of the things that were in the report was that the behaviour of the staff was posing a risk to patient safety. So that, in an instance, is very, very concerning. Also for staff who work within healthcare settings, they need to know that they feel valued within their own settings. The leak of bullying and harassment of staff is also very, very concerning. So, as I say, this report has exposed a very serious failings within the cardiac surgery unit, and that absolutely needs addressed, and it needs addressed to ensure that public will be confident moving forward.
Yeah, that issue of safety is absolutely critical, because the report does say the clinical outcomes were good within the unit, but there was a significant risk to patient safety given that those behaviours were what they were at the time. Again, the public would want to know that, would they not, if they were potentially going to be patients in that unit?
Absolutely. I mean, and I have my own heart conditions. I was a patient of the cardiology unit, not the cardiac surgery unit, but, at some point could be a patient within the cardiac surgery unit. So I think everybody here in the North has a right to have confidence in all public healthcare settings. This report has exposed very serious concerns about that particular unit, and the public do need to see trust restored. And I think that can only happen whenever we have full transparency, when we see the report, we see the recommendations, we see the action plans, and we can hear from the trust itself how they intend to put the situation right.
Yeah, and the issue, of course, is, and this is where the interrogation is required, how extensive is this problem? Because we've heard from your colleague Diane Dodds on the committee, we've heard from some of the unions involved a belief that it extends within the Belfast Trust beyond that unit and potentially into other trusts as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the other concerning things within the report was that when staff did make complaints and bring issues to the attention of the Belfast Trust, that they, in their view, that the Trust was slow to respond. So I think that is serious and very concerning, that whenever allegations are being made, that the Trust isn't looking into these effectively and quickly. And the other concerning thing that has come out as a result of the media reporting of this report in the last week is that unions are saying that this isn't an isolated issue, that junior staff, that nurses have been subject to harassment and bullying in other healthcare settings, and I think that is very concerning for us all.
So what do you do as a committee to move that forward? I mean, you can sit here and you can say you're being told that may be the case. As I understand it, you yourself still have to see this report in full. Diane Dodds has been clear that she has seen it. We know it's been leaked, it's been widely reported, but just to be clear, you have not seen a copy of this report in full yourself. So you're depending on what has been put into the public domain by others.
Yeah, and that's
a bizarre situation.
It is. It's bizarre and it's untenable. As chair of the health committee, we have made it clear that we need to see the report. We have invited the senior leadership of the Belfast Trust to the committee, so it would be completely untenable for that meeting to go ahead without us having seen the report, so that we can ask the appropriate questions to the Belfast Trust to satisfy ourselves, but more importantly, to satisfy the public that the Belfast Trust are dealing with this issue in the way that we would expect them to.
Yeah, I mean, Mr Mulgrew there was making it very clear on Friday, and we saw a little bit of it earlier in the programme, that transparency was key. He talked particularly about transparency within the staff. We've discussed the public, but the fact that politicians who are supposed to be holding people to account haven't seen the report in full at this stage and aren't in a position to ask informed questions, many people will be very surprised. And the question is, what do you do next? You said you want to see the report. How do you actually get answers to how widespread this problem is?
Well, I would expect to see the report, and the Health Committee have invited the Belfast Trust to the committee, so we will be asking the appropriate questions. I think it's also important to put on record that this isn't the only problem within the Belfast Trust in recent years. There have been a number of issues within the Belfast Trust going back to the hyponatremia scandal, the neurology scandal, the capital projects with regard to the maternity hospital, the incidents at the recently opened mental health hospital. So, there are a number of issues that need addressed within the Belfast Trust, and we need to have confidence that they are able to do that.
And, just finally, we don't have a lot of time here. People will be asking today, if you boil this down, is it too much to ask expensively trained, very well paid surgeons to behave like adults?
No, it's not, and it must happen. It's appropriate. I mean, this behaviour would be completely inappropriate in any work environment, but more so in an environment where patient safety has to be absolutely paramount. We expect staff to have patient safety uppermost in their mind, but we also expect them to treat their work colleagues with respect.
OK. Philip McGuigan, thanks very much indeed. We'll talk to you about this again, no doubt. But for now, thank you. Suzanne Breen's been listening to that. Suzanne, I suppose on one level this is a health story, but people will still look to politicians to hold officials and the minister to account over this. But Mr McGuigan's made it clear he's not in full possession of the facts at this stage.
And it is shameful that he hasn't seen it as the chair of the Health Committee. I mean, we are all aware of the challenges that our health service faces. It is on its knees as it is. And now to find out that the behaviour in the cardiac unit of some staff is potentially jeopardising patient safety. That is shocking, and it does nothing for people out there to instil confidence in the health service that they are going to get the treatment. Sometimes their lives are going to depend on it, the treatment that they need. It is very, very worrying.
OK, let's talk about your paper's most recent Lucid Talk poll finding published a few days ago. A broad brushstrokes, what does the poll tell us?
Well, it's very bad for the executive parties. Bar the Ulster Unionists, they're the only party that is in the executive of those four parties that isn't down. Sinn Féin took the biggest hit. It fell 2 points from February. It's on 26%. Now, that's still decent for any political party, but it is a 3-year low. We have been used to Sinn Féin, being on very much a high. Before Sinn Féin entered the executive, before devolution was restored, it was on 31 to 32%. So it has fallen consistently. The DUP is on 18%. That is 1 point down, and there is no signs at all that under Gavin Robbins' leadership, the party is making up ground. It's just stuck there, and we are 2 years from an assembly election, but it's still worrying that the party is so far behind Sinn Féin. It's not great for Alliance either. Their surge is clearly over. They're down 1 point to 13%, and the TUV, which is represented in Stormont, but we know it doesn't think a lot of the institutions, it was up 1 point to 12%. So TUV support is very, very solid, and the DUP cannot get away. It cannot shed off all those problems over the protocol. The parties that aren't in Stormont, smaller parties like Aontú and the Greens, they're up as well, again showing that people are quite dissatisfied with what they see happening at Stormont.
We're nearly out of time. The SDLP, no change on 11%, though up from 8% last summer, but in 6th place behind the TUV in this poll. Just need to finish by saying it is, of course, a snapshot. There is no election imminent, and the changes, to be fair, are within the margin of error.
They are, but all the polls are about is really showing trends, and the trends at the moment aren't good for any of the executive parties, bar the UUP.
OK, Suzanne, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again a little bit later in the programme, of course. But now for a look ahead to something we'll be bringing you on The View later this week. It's a sobering tale about our endangered old buildings and what happens if we don't look after them. Belfast's Crumlin Road Jail and the courthouse opposite it demonstrate very clearly what can happen. One was restored under public ownership and is now thriving, while the other fell apart, languishing in private ownership over the last 20 years. But the new owners are determined to change that.
Cheek by Jowl, this building, which is coming to life, has been restored beautifully and is owned by government, and then the building across the street, which by the same architect, the same hand, Charles Lanyon, one of the most preeminent Victorian architects of the city, which is basically a carcass.
What we've got is a project that has the ability to regenerate an area, not just the building in itself, but this is a regenerative project for this part of Crumlin Road. And when we look at it in the context of the other astonishing heritage that we've got in listed buildings, then we really have something here that I would like to see the public engage with, that is operational, successful, and is sustaining itself.
And ahead of that film, this Thursday, you can listen to the full conversation on our BBC Red Lines podcast, which is available now on BBC Sounds. Now, next to the case of a man widely reported to be a UVF commander and a leading loyalist community worker caught with guns and bullets who wasn't charged under terrorism legislation. Questions have been raised about Winky Irvine's subsequent sentencing, and the Public Prosecution Service is currently working to establish if there is any legal basis to refer that to the Court of Appeal as potentially unduly lenient. The Ulster Unionist MLA Doug Beattie sits on the Stormont Justice Committee. He shares many of the concerns raised, and he's with me now. Welcome to the programme. Let's just step through this logically. The Belfast Telegraph and the Nolan Show on Radio Ulster reported pretty extensively on this story last week. We know the concern here is that Winky Irvine was not convicted and sentenced under terrorism legislation. The legislation he was sentenced under carried a minimum term, but the judge believed his to be an exceptional case, so he sentenced him to less than the minimum term. Now, that's for starters. What are your concerns about that?
Well, my concerns are pretty simple. The mandatory sentence for illegal firearms is 5 years. If you add on aggregating factors to that, the fact is that he lied when he was confronted with that. Secondly, he has never owned up to why he had these weapons in the first place, where they were coming from, where they were going to, what they were being used for. These are all aggregating factors, which means the sentence should have been between 5 and 10 years. And therefore, reducing it to half of that is pretty bizarre, and in many cases it's kind of ludicrous. Where he may have got credit for pleading guilty at the last minute, that should never have taken anything away from the 5 years that he should have got.
Sentencing is complicated. The judge had his rationale for why he did what he did, and if this case is taken further, presumably that will be explored in more detail. But you met with the director of the PPS during the week. That meeting, as I understand it, had been arranged before all of this happened. But did you raise your concerns about sentencing in that conversation?
Yes, I did. But look, I mean, it's important to say this, Mark, that this was about me talking to him about sentencing in general, because I have real concern about sentencing, particularly those for sexual crimes. And I've raised on many, many occasions. But we did speak about the Winston Irvine case. And I put my case to him that I found it incredible that he wasn't charged on the terrorist legislation, given when this happened, at the same time that the hoax bomb, a couple of months previously, was delivered to Simon Coveney, and all of the paraphernalia that was found in both of the accused houses. And I found that it was incredible that he wasn't charged under terrorist legislation. Now, in fairness to the Director of Public Prosecution, he gave me his reasons. We disagreed. But he gave me his reasons. But he is in the process of going through this to take it to appeal.
OK, so that's the first issue dealt with. Then it's reported that Winston Irvine has joined the loyalist wing in Maghaberry. And to do that, you have to explicitly state, as I understand it, that you're a member of or a supporter of a prescribed organisation. And in his case, of course, that's the UVF. So that compounds the concerns and criticism of people like yourself, presumably, that this man, who avoided being sentenced according to terrorism legislation, promptly identifies himself with the terrorists in prison.
Yes, and look, I've had a long-standing issue with the separated wing in Maghaberry, to be honest. We spend so much time getting these people off our streets, getting them through the courts and then putting them behind bars, only for them to go into a separated wing, be called brigadier after their time is served, come out with the kudos and just do exactly what they were doing previously. So I have an issue with that anyway. But I've got to be honest, this did not surprise me, Mark, that he was going to go into the separated wing, not in any shape or form. It was always going to be the case. And it adds to that narrative of why this was not seen as a terrorist-related case, considering what was happening at the time. And I've already mentioned the hoax bomb against Simon Coveney, but the paraphernalia that was found. I actually know the person whose van was hijacked in order to deliver that bomb to Simon Coveney. Now, was he being intimidated after that case? Was that weapon coming from intimidating him or going to intimidating him? We don't know. But Winston Irvine does know, but he wouldn't tell, and yet he gets time off his sentence. It's pretty ludicrous. OK,
we then have further reporting from the Belfast Telegraph on Friday about the case of David Lammy, described as a loyalist, found guilty of intimidation, not prosecuted under terrorism legislation. But then in advance of his sentencing, the PPS requests that he should be sentenced under the Counter-Terrorism and Sentencing Act 2021 that allows for extended jail terms. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I say what's good for one is good for all. I'm a great believer in trying to get terrorists, paramilitaries, organised criminals off our streets and use whatever legislation that we can to get them off and keep them off. And therefore, if we can use terrorist legislation, let's use it. But if we're going to use it, let's use it for all. It's going to be absolutely crazy if we suddenly see Lammy given a sentence which is larger than the sentence handed to Winston Irvine, who was caught red-handed with weapons and ammunitions in his car and didn't own up to why they were there or where they were going to. So we are in a difficult position. But I would say this, Mark, this is a symptom of our criminal justice system, which is in absolute decline and has lost confidence for many people. And even the Criminal Justice Inspectorate have said that it lacks vision, it lacks unifying objectives, pretty much what we've seen in regards to the review of the policing board, where it was described as a two-legged stool or a parent-child relationship. The DOJ needs to get a grip of this. OK. There are a lot of imponderables and unknowns in the conversation that we're having today. We'll see what happens in 3 weeks' time as far as the PPS is concerned. We'll see if the Irvine case goes to the Court of Appeal. But at some stage, whenever that will be, Winston Irvine is going to be released from prison. What do you think the implications are for him and for the wider peace process which he had engaged in and which was discussed in court, the fact that he was part of a peace-building process? Do you see that continuing for him when he is finally, whenever that is, released from jail? Look, I'm kind of getting tired, Mark, of people using the peace process as a get out of jail free card, or coming out and using it to say, look, I'm a peace builder. Look what I've done. Give me something for this. If he comes out and he continues to work towards peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland, that is a good thing. That is a good thing. But the reality is, can he be trusted? Can he be trusted? This is a man who said, I'm a peace builder, and yet was found with weapons and ammunition in the boot of his car. The two just can't marry up together. And those people who gave references to Winston Irvine, so many of them gave them before he pleaded guilty, and they gave him on the reference to the individual. So maybe he has got things to offer, and I hope he has got something to offer, but it's going to be hard to trust a man who says one thing during the day and then at night time is moving weapons illegally around our city.
So you would be sceptical?
Well, I am sceptical. I'm sceptical now, having heard the outcome of the court case, and I certainly will not be giving any trust in that direction in the coming months and years.
OK. We'll leave it there, Doug Beattie. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to join us. Suzanne's still with me. She's been listening to that. Well, what do you make of this case and what you've just heard from Doug Beattie?
Well, the first thing is fair play to Doug Beattie. He's been making the running on this. And there have been very few politicians, unfortunately, that have chosen to raise their heads above the parapets on the matter. And those who have, the feeling that I have is that they're going through the motions, that there's really no energy or enthusiasm to what they're saying. So Doug is showing genuine and true leadership here. I think most people will be wondering what on earth the UVF is doing in existence 30 years after the CLMC ceasefire, and what is one of its leaders doing, driving around with a boot that includes guns and ammunition in it. Why wasn't he prosecuted under anti-terror laws? He could have received up to 14 years in jail had he been. And then when he was prosecuted under the legislation, the minimum sentence could have been 5 years, but he ends up doing 15 years. He's going to do 15 months in jail. It's just completely unacceptable. And there has been no explanation from Mr. Irvine as to why he had those weapons.
Well, maybe we will get clarity on some of those issues in the weeks and months ahead. Let's park that conversation for now and turn to Gerry Adams' victory over the BBC after a 5-week defamation trial in Dublin. Here's just a quick reminder of what both sides said outside court on Friday morning.
Taking this case was about putting manners on the British Broadcasting Corporation. I know many journalists. I like to think that I get on well with the most of them. And I wish you well, and I would uphold your right to do your job. But the British Broadcasting Corporation upholds the ethos of the British state in Ireland. And in my view, it's out of sync in many fronts with the Good Friday Agreement. It hasn't caught on to where we are on this island as part of the process, the continuing process of building peace and justice and harmony, and hopefully in the time ahead, unity.
It was important that we defend our journalism, and we stand by that decision. Our past is difficult terrain for any jury, and we thank them for their diligence and careful consideration of the issues in this case. The implications of their decision, though, are profound. As our legal team made clear, if the BBC's case cannot be won under existing Irish defamation law, it's hard to see how anyone's could. And they warned that today's decision would hinder freedom of expression.
So that's some reaction from some of the key players in Dublin on Friday. Suzanne, first of all, a significant victory for Gerry Adams.
Yeah, it was. There is no getting away from that. Look, just a few months ago, he was literally a Disney villain in the mini-series Say Nothing. Apart from General Sir Frank Kitson, British Army General, nobody came across as more loathsome. The last time that I saw Mr. Adams in court was in 2013, where he was a prosecution witness in the case of his paedophile brother Liam, who had raped Anya, Gerry Adams' niece. And Gerry Adams was torn apart. His testimony was completely destroyed by defence barrister Ailish McDermott, holes were shown to be in it, left, right and centre. This time in court was obviously a more pleasant experience for Gerry Adams, and he has left the building, so to speak, €100,000 wealthier.
As far as the Disney series Say Nothing is concerned, worth just pointing out that there was a right of reply at the end of the closing titles in every episode of that series, quoting Gerry Adams saying that he had never been a member of the IRA. And in this particular case, he's made it clear he's giving the money that he was awarded in the court in Dublin to good causes. Look, there's a range of views already to be seen within the media, north and south, about whether this is going to have a chill effect on journalism, whether this will perhaps limit freedom of expression. What's your feeling on that? Because it's a huge issue for people to grapple with, isn't it?
Well, I think it will have implications, but there are other things that have also had, I think, greater implications. For example, the arrest of Trevor Burney and Barry McCaffrey for doing nothing other than their job by the PSNI, when the PSNI chase journalists, serve them with production orders, and if they don't comply and hand over their notes, their mobile phones, their computers, they can face up to 5 years in jail. Those are far greater issues. But yes, this will affect journalism. I think when it comes to those characters who have played a role in our conflict, journalists will have to be very careful when they are writing about what they are involved in now, what they're involved in post-peace process, post-ceasefire. I think journalists are still okay when it comes to trouble-related issues, but the message from the court was that people can have reputations, very bad reputations from the past, but people can change, and you cannot define someone by what they have done decades ago.
Just worth pointing out, of course, that Irish politicians were in the process of changing their defamation laws before the election last year, and that they are now expected to start looking at that again. You've written about the significance of the case in your paper today. What are the wider issues that you'd want to draw attention to, that you think people need to think about?
Well, I think that if you have to be really, really careful what you're writing. If you're going to accuse not just an illegal organisation of sanctioning a murder, but an individual, then you have to have rock solid evidence that can be presented in court. In this case, the Spotlight documentary had one source, an IRA informer. He couldn't appear in court. It said it had 5 other sources, but we never heard any detail about them in the programme or in court, and that's not good enough.
OK. Suzanne, thanks very much indeed. The BBC, of course, stands over its journalism and says that the programme was in the public interest. We've got to leave it there for now. Thank you very much indeed. That's it. Don't forget about that Red Lines podcast on Crumlin Road Prison and Courthouse. It's well worth a listen. If you want to catch up on this programme, The View last week, where we talked about AI, or any of our politics programmes and podcasts, you can now find all of them in one place. Just go to bbc.co.uk/newsni or the BBC News app and scroll down where you'll find them all together. But for now, from all of us, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.